thing about that stop overnight was I was called upon to act as a courier between the company and HQ. Somebody had to do it, so and I was picked out. So I had to walk up the road a mile or so to HQ, which I did. Reported in there, and as I was the runner for number 3 company, said, right, go and put you in the barn over there. It's a little village, farmhouse and that. Put your head down in the barn and we'll call you if we need you to take a message about the company. So I did. I put my head down and although we'd been travelling up, we had no sleep at all for days. And I lay down on the straw, fell fast asleep. Tip of the sun. Absolutely stark. And then the first thing I knew was in the morning a sergeant came in and woke me up and said, come on, he said, get back to your company, no need to stay any longer. He said, have you been there all night? I said, well, yeah, I've been asleep, I was told to stay here. He said, yeah, but what about all the racket in the night? I said, what racket? He said, all hell was letting loose. They were shelling all over the place here last night. I said, well, it was the headquarters, you know. Yeah. Anyway, fortunately, they didn't hit the barn. They didn't wake me, anyway. And that was my first experience of battle. I don't know, I never heard of a shot fired.
Oh yes. Yeah. Did I give you my speech? She didn't.
There one morning, planes were over, and we'd never seen a German aircraft for yonks since we've been there, and since August or whatever. And we were all saying, oh, and then somebody said, you idiots, that's a Jemmy. So we just waved it goodbye and never came back. The house we stayed at, there's a man and his wife, daughter about 14, a younger son. Very nice, very modern house, very nice family. The father was a Russian in actual fact. I used to feel every day go out on his bike and come back with a few potatoes, trying to get food. So what we did, whenever we can take rations back to them, which we could, if we got a food parcel or something like that, access to food from the army issue, we take them chocolates and cigarettes, biscuits and things like this, which just basics to us. To them, they were absolutely made up with. You know, they could not only enjoy it themselves, they could use it as barter to buy ordinary food. So whenever we could help them out with food, we did do, even if we could buy it ourselves. I got a letter from the daughter. It never got to me directly, but it somehow or other it came to my home. And how that happened, because I had this letter, which I don't know where it is now, in which the daughter was writing about how great it was to have us there.
Right.
We're actually here now then, aren't we?
Yeah.
God, blimey.
So it looks like it's probably this one. Here you go.
Yeah, but look at that.
Straps.
Blimey, 73 years ago. Nope. Don't have an accident while you're filming it. We want number 32,
Yeah.
which I thought was on an end.
39.
39.
So it's my side. 34. Yeah, it's 32.
Wow. Gosh. Oh, God bless you, Dad.
Well, this area is built about 1936, 37.
Right, okay. Yeah.
And it was built for people who were worked in a factory that was there. There's no factory anymore, but there were 2 factories over in that.
Right.
I can show you if you
So
want.
what did they used to make there then?
It was one company, Volt, electricity, gas, all that sort of things.
All right,
They,
utility company type
yes.
thing. Yeah. So most of the employees would live
yes, they
quite
did.
local.
Yes. And it would have been 2 families in one house. Dus it were separate. It was because it was, the people didn't have much money. They didn't have the whole house, but they each had a part of the house.
Yeah. All right. Wow.
What I wanted to, it's been brilliant seeing you, and thanks for your hospitality. But we said about the history of the house, we kind of wanted you to have, it's a really, really poignant part of the history of here, as we said earlier. So I had to give you something to stay here forever. So I couldn't bring my dad, I'm afraid. It would have been brilliant him being here, but I can leave him. So.
Oh, that's very.
So there's
very
my
nice
dad.
of you. Thank you so much.
So anyone who visits in the future, you'll know.
Oh, thank you so much.
And alongside it, there, my dad is. This is his troop. My dad is that man there.
Yeah, which
And
one's
Harry is the chap right at the front, is
Okay.
the chap that died, that my dad buried. And he was in Tilburg as well.
This is Harry. Harry died, and they going to visit his grave, and this is his father.
Okay.
I can keep this.
Absolutely. It's from when we left Tilburg, where we know Harry and my dad were in billets there. We've gone through all sorts of towns and villages between Holland and now into Germany, a little bit into Germany. But they were mostly in reserve, and they certainly weren't fighting, and they saw devastation. But there's no evidence in the war diary that my dad and Harry were directly involved in this bit until they get here, where they didn't expect it. But sounds like when they came to the north side of the village, which is behind me, they were hit with some very heavy shelling and mortar fire. I'll just read a bit from this. No opposition was encountered until they entered Ham. The leading troop of number 3 squadron reached the northern end of the village where we're standing, or I'm standing now. We're starting to push forward to the second objective when a German self-propelled gun started firing straight down the road from the north, which is either somewhere over my shoulder, could be even where I'm standing, and there is another road over to my left. So I'm guessing it's either down here or it's over there in the distance. It's certainly on this ridge, on this land, you could say, where they were first attacked. And it stopped them dead in their tracks. One tank was disabled, completely blocking the track. At the same time, heavier mortar and shell fire started falling in the village. One particularly unlucky salvo from a Moaning Mini, would you believe they had a gun called a Moaning Mini, landed in the midst of number 1 squadron, who were by now in the middle of the village. One tank of the squadron received a direct hit. It was now nearly dark, so this took them to the end of the day. They couldn't get anywhere, so basically they just backtracked from here. So this was the first bit of coming through this period in March where they were stopped in their tracks. They hit heavy fire. And they were heading up for a place a few miles up the road that we think they never got to, because it took the next day to sort this out. Although interesting reading the war diary, because the commanding officer, who's obviously not here, he's some miles away, was just saying go forward, and they had to send somebody back to him to explain the situation and say that they couldn't. And when they did take it a day or two later, it was because they got in the woods here. They managed to surround both sides of here, and it only took 2 days to take Ham and then move on. Guilder House, where Harry sadly lost his life. When the tanks came into Guilder House, Harry was at the front. He was the commander of the tank, the very first tank. My dad was about 4 tanks behind him, and behind me is where the troops, at about getting off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, got together. Harry had done some work further back on his own. They gathered together as one troop in a straight line. Just on the bend, as we can see, the tanks would have been behind each other, and at 3 o'clock Harry, as the lead tank, was then ordered to make his way into the village on his own to see what was around the village. They wouldn't risk the whole of the troop. Harry was the kind of almost a scapegoat. He had the horrible task of seeing if there was anything here. So we're now going to follow the route that Harry took coming into the village itself of Guilder House. So by now Harry's in the lead tank on his own. The road, we've just seen the other tanks, the 5 or 6 tanks are on that corner. Harry's come up this road on his own, and the record note, still looking for German troops, came alongside the station building here. which is now a restaurant. So I'm now standing in front of the station, Bahnhof. Harry has come alongside. We've just seen him coming, leaving his tanks behind. He's on his own, coming past the station. It's very modern now, but we're just going to go up the road. Sadly, Harry died about 100 yards away from where we're standing now. We're just going to do that, the last 100 yards of Harry's life. And the road at the time, just shops here now. But we're going to walk along what would have been the road, the main road through Guilderhouse, to where Harry's tank was finally scuppered and he lost his life. So we'll do that walk now. And as we're approaching the bend that we can see in the distance, the road bends severely to the left. Harry was particularly conscious of the troops now firing at him on the right, so he ordered the gunner to move the turret, the big gun on the tank, to move to the right, which was a pretty frightening process in World War II and took some time. And while it was doing that, the driver's view was completely obscured. So as the tank approached this bend, they were pretty much were saying that they were blind at this point. The driver couldn't see what was in front of him. So at this point, as frightened as they were, they kind of had no idea what was around the corner here. Obviously all these buildings on the left weren't here, and it was shrubland at the time, and on the right there was an open sewer, which we'll mention in a minute. It's a very critical part of what happened next. So as the tank came to this point on the bend, Harry went forward and the tank stopped on the corner here, and as the turret had finished turning to the right, the driver, George Dodds, could then see right across there in the distance and up this road, what was a road at the time, and there was just a line of Panzer tanks with the guns pointing at Harry's tank. And in fact the first thing that George will have seen was, referred to it in the records as, a spinning ball of cotton wool coming at them before they knew that the tank was hit. So the tank was hit and destroyed, but it didn't kill or injure, in fact, the men, the four who were inside. But in that moment of terror, of course they had to get out to the tank before it blew. And what happened here, probably, it's hard to say exactly, but probably somewhere very, very close to here, George, the driver, jumped out of the tank to the left-hand side and ran for his life through the undergrowth here that sounds like it was up to about waist height, so it wouldn't have been an easy run, heading back towards the station. He didn't make it. Just before he got to the station, the troops who'd been firing at him from the other side of the road saw him running, ran after him and shot him down and killed him. Hetherington and Eager jumped out of the right hand side of the tank and fell into an open sewer, which we can see the evidence of the sewer here today, but at the time this was just an open ditch, a deep ditch, and it gave them cover. And as horrible as it was, landing in raw sewage, it saved their lives. They were hidden under here and survived. They were the only two that survived, but was killed. Now Harry, as the lead, he jumped off the back of the tank, but as he was at the back, another shell came, and the force of that shell, from what Hetherington and Eager saw, they described it as almost he was just picked up and thrown the entire distance of this road almost towards the station. It must have been truly terrifying. Harry wouldn't have known what hit him, which is really good, so he wouldn't have, suffered painful death. But it's a really tragic, obviously, part of the journey of this tank, and that's really the end of this part of the story. What we do know is, you can just see in the distance, just round here, we can see the windmill in the distance. The tanks that followed up after Harry's tank was hit, that then came up and found Harry and George. Well, my dad was part of that, and he was given the task of burying Harry with some of his colleagues, and they walked up the hill towards the windmill, and just the other side of that windmill he was buried, and the troops then had to move on to the next town. The war just carried on. So Harry was killed just past the railway station building, and we know that my dad and the tanks behind then came up and found the remains of Harry and his friend George. But my dad's story here was that they then got Harry and needed to bury him quickly. We know he's now buried at Rheinberg Cemetery, but at the time they had to bury him very near where he died. So pretty sure this road you can see behind me with a noisy car, this road here would have been the track. We're almost in a straight line from the station building. So they would have walked up this track to the top of the hill. John, my dad, remembers so well being on the top of this hill where they brought Harry. And he talks about open ground and a tree, and they buried him by that on the flat land at the top of the hill. We can't say exactly, but we think this is where Harry was buried. I saw the windmill there, we'll talk about that in a second. But they would have, as they got up the hill, they'd have been looking for the first bit of open ground. And there are quite some memorials up here for all sorts of historical things, but we think there's every chance, where we're looking at now, somewhere in this area. My dad remembered looking down, and the views from up here are quite spectacular. So we think we're, well, almost certainly we're very, very near where Harry would have been buried.
I think they would have deliberately kept this open, Chris, so as the windmill could turn.
Yeah.
So they kept this as open ground, so as it can fire up the windmill, really. So although we're surrounded by trees, I think this would have been kept open.
Always open, yeah.
So I think this is going to be where the open ground is.
So, I mean, who knows, but gosh, I could be standing on the ground where Harry was buried. We're certainly very, very near where Harry was. So having seen him at the cemetery in Rheinberg, it's really quite something to see him buried there, but actually know he was initially buried here as well. I said I'd mention the windmill because actually this is a significant part of the fighting at Guilder House as well. The Harry was the lead tank coming up to the left of the windmill as we're looking, and there was a jerry tank in front of it, a Panzer tank. When it was being fired on, the war diaries refer to it going behind the windmill, to the right of the windmill as we're looking. So, and it basically hid there whilst Harry and the rest of the tanks made their way into the village. Wow, you're right. Here, let's get out to the shadow. Here's our Harry. Oh, here's our Harry. This is my dad's friend and Oakwood Avenue's Harry. How amazing is this for us to be sharing this together today?